Commission on Human Rights. And on behalf of the Commission, I greet the delegation of the illustrious state of the United States and the distinguished representatives of the alleged victims. I hereby declare open the public hearing in case 15169, Michael Brown Jr. and Lesley McSpadden, regarding the United States of America. I give the floor to Executive Secretary Tanya Renon so that she can introduce the case to us. Executive Secretary.
Gracias, Presidenta, y muy buenas tardes. El presente caso se relaciona con la presunta responsabilidad del Estado por la alegada muerte violenta de Michael Brown Jr., ciudadano afroamericano, el 9 de agosto de 2014 en Ferguson, Missouri, luego de que un oficial de policía le disparara en circunstancias que equivaldrían a una ejecución extrajudicial. También se alega que el asesinato de la presunta víctima se produjo en el contexto de un uso excesivo y sistemático de la fuerza contra minorías raciales negras por parte de agentes de policía predominantemente blancos en Missouri y en los Estados Unidos. El 18 de diciembre de 2022, la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos notificó a las partes su informe de admisibilidad número 367-22. La presente audiencia tiene por objeto recibir la declaración de la señora Lesley McSpadden, madre de la presunta víctima, así como profundizar los alegatos de fondo de las partes y recibir información sobre la situación actual del caso. Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Executive Secretary. And whilst we will have an opportunity to hear both the petitioner as well as the state, I would like us to start with a statement of the alleged victim, Mrs. Lesley McSpadden, and is offered by the petitioners. The alleged victim will testify about the direct impact of the death of her son had on her and her family, the actions to achieve truth and justice, and integral reparation. The petitioners will have up to 10 minutes to carry out their questioning. Subsequently, the state may also question the alleged victim for up to 10 minutes as well. And then the commission, and we have 6 commissioners here on this hearing this afternoon, the commission will have an opportunity to ask questions. I would like to ask the declarant to state her full name, place of birth, and place of residence.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Lesley. Thank you. Lesley McSpadden. My date of birth is 12/18/1979, and I reside in Florissant, Missouri.
And you also, and your place of birth is?
My place of birth is St. Louis, Missouri.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
And you will, in your declaration that you give here today, you will tell the truth and the whole truth?
Yes.
Okay, I give the floor to the petitioners so that they can carry out their questions.
Thank you. Lesley, how did Prosecutor Bob McCullough's decision not to bring charges in November of 2014 change your views of the law and of the justice system?
When Michael was shot and killed, the streets were filled with people, and a lot of those people were parents who they had went through the same thing with the then prosecutor, Bob McCullough. And I heard a lot of what he was not going to do. But in this case, I just, how could he not do the right thing? Michael did not have a weapon, and he hadn't really, Michael didn't have a weapon, main point. And as the months built and the time progressed, I would hear more and more about his pattern and practice while he was prosecutor. And when the decision was made for him not to indict, I was crushed, I was hurt, and I was frustrated because I really couldn't understand how he came to this conclusion. And it primarily, I lost hope in the justice system. That was the first strike for me.
And then what were your interactions like with the Department of Justice? And what was the impact of the report that the Department of Justice had put out in March of 2015?
So this woman in particular who worked for the Department of Justice, we spent a lot of time together on the telephone. I told her all about Mike, what a great kid he was, a great brother he was. We talked about everything and anything that pertained to Michael. And this went on for about maybe 2 months. And one day she just called me and she started to say things to me that they were going to look into Michael's juvenile record. And that's not anything that her and I had ever talked about within that 2-month span. So I was really confused as to what she was referring to. And I told her, well, Michael doesn't have a juvenile record. And she insisted that, well, we're going to look. So if there's something there, you should tell me now. And I had no idea what she was talking about. And maybe 2 weeks later was the appointment for us to go down to the Department of Justice to hear their decision and their conclusion. And when we arrived, they had us to wait for 1 hour and 45 minutes in the lobby. And when we went up, it was less than 5 minutes of their time that was taken to let us know that they were not moving forward in charges or a prosecution. I became a little upset because we had waited over 100 days to hear their announcement, and then you had us waiting in the lobby for 1 hour and 45 minutes. I wanted her to give me some more detail. She had a large stack of papers in front of her. I wanted her to go through some of those papers and explain to me how they came to this conclusion. She would not do that. And in return, she said to me that she felt threatened by me and my tone. And this let me know that this narrative that had been building about my son was now a part of her biased conclusion, and that the narrative was to make Mike look like the aggressor. And now it was to make Mike's mother look like the aggressor. And never once did I threaten her or get loud with her or get close to her or any of those things. But once again, that was the second strike in me losing hope in the justice system.
Thank you, Lesley. And then Wesley Bell took over as the St. Louis prosecutor, the Ferguson prosecutor in 2019. How would you describe his handling of the case, and what was the interaction like with him?
So Wesley was on ground zero with us when everything happened. He marched with us, he protested with us, him and I have had several conversations. We've met more than a handful of times to talk about him running for city council, which after city council came the prosecutor, and he used Mike's situation to be put into office. And I was given broken promises throughout that time, because once he was elected to prosecutor, he called us into a meeting and he announced that he had done a secret investigation. He did not do a public investigation. He did not bring in any new investigators, but he had done a secret investigation, and that things were happening to the city prosecutor because she was doing her job correctly and he was choosing not to, and that he did not want that backlash. He told me that this guy was wearing the case and he had not been exonerated, and that was the best that he could do for us. And in addition, the victims' compensation that's here in Missouri does not give out compensation to victims of police shootings. he was willing to change that and put it in Michael's name or my name only if the officer is found or brought up on charges. And I did not agree to that because it did not speak to my situation. So I felt betrayed by Wesley Bell, very much so. And not only did he use my son's situation to get into office for prosecutor, he's using it again for his Congress campaign. Very hurtful.
And Lesley, when he made that statement to you, did he mention another prosecutor, Kim Fox in Chicago, as part of that discussion?
He referred to Kim Gardner, who was the city prosecutor. Yes, the city prosecutor at the time in St. Louis County. I'm sorry.
Right. And what did he say about Kim Gardner? Well, how is that relevant to your situation?
Kim Gardner was actually doing, she was doing the opposite of what Wesley was not doing. Wesley was not willing to prosecute the police officer. He pretty much had taken on the pattern and practice of Bob McCullough, and she was the complete opposite. And his words to me and my lawyer, who was in the room at the time, was that you see what they're doing to Kim Gardner and that I don't want that type of backlash.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then one last question here. After the DOJ report had come out and all of this narrative in the public was made public, how did that change the way people saw the situation? How did that impact the story about your son? How did people take that?
Can you say that again for me, Justin? What's the question?
Well, I guess the question is, how was the DOJ report used to change the narrative about your son for the public?
So for me, the DOJ report was an extension of Darren Wilson's report. He walked in with a blank report and they build it up. And I hope you understand what I'm saying. They put it together for him so that every entity that came behind him would agree and once again make Mike the aggressor, make Mike's size and his color in his community the reason why Darren Wilson decided to kill Mike that day. So they use their DOJ report like a Bible, and it has a lot of holes in it, just as Mike's body did.
Thank you, Lesley.
Thank you very much. I think the time is up. I'm so sorry, but we now give the floor to the state delegations to ask their questions of Mrs. McSpadden.
Thank you. We decline the opportunity to ask any questions of Ms. McSpadden at this time. Thank you.
Okay, so now, commissioners, should you have any questions, this is our opportunity to speak with Mrs. McSpadden and ask her questions. I would like to start off with the Commissioner Denise, who's Rapporteur for People of African Descent within the Commission.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon to Ms. McSpadden and family, the petitioners, and the representatives of the state. First of all, my heart goes out to Ms. McSpadden. We're covering a period of 10 years, and hearing you speak, we hear the suffering. It underscores the urgent need for accountability and reform to end the scourge of systemic racism in the U.S. criminal justice system. I could say the Commission stands in solidarity with the African-American community in their struggle for justice and equal rights under the law. The Commission has made several pronouncements expressing deep concern over racism in the U.S. criminal system and the lack of accountability for police brutality and racial profiling and murders that have taken place. An historical legacy of racism and oppression has played a central role in perpetuating the current racial disparities in the criminal justice system. The Commission has used its mandate to monitor and promote human rights in the Americas, to highlight systemic racism in the US criminal system, including disproportionate use of force against African Americans and the lack of accountability for police misconduct. The Commission has urged the US to address these human rights concerns in line with its international obligations. In this context, I have some questions, specific questions for Ms. McSpadden, as well as for the state. Could you please detail the damages suffered due to the lack of investigation and sanction to the person responsible for the facts? Did you have an opportunity, Ms. McSpadden, to participate in the criminal proceedings for the death of your son? And what measures do you consider that a state should adopt to repair the damages caused? Have you ever felt discriminated against, threatened, or persecuted for seeking justice for the death of your child? Can I continue with the questions to the state, Madam President?
Not at this stage, just the questions are just for the witness.
Okay, so these are my questions that I submit. Thank you. I yield the floor back to you.
Thank you. Mrs. McSpadden, we will ask all the questions, so I hope you're taking some notes so you'll get a chance to maybe just answer them in one go. So just to alert you that you will get a few more questions. And I do want to ask the commissioners to be attentive to the fact that Mrs. McSpadden has to answer all the questions. So let's think about that. I turn over to Commissioner Caballero, Second Vice President of the Commission.
Thank you very much, President. I hope the interpretation is because I'm going to speak in Spanish. Señora Lesley McFadden, pues primero que nada me solidarizo con su dolor, con su sentir, con este caso tan impresionante, pero al mismo tiempo que devela todavía pues la crueldad de nuestras sociedades, la discriminación y que devela también la impunidad y la falta de justicia. Le extiendo un sentido profundo de mi solidaridad y respeto a usted, a su familia, por esta pérdida tan dolorosa que ha tenido de su hijo y este tiempo que ha estado también además buscando que se repare esto de alguna manera. Y quiero preguntarle yo concretamente, y es una pregunta que también hizo la comisionada de Mesa en una de sus partes, si usted ha tenido alguna sensación de amenaza o ha recibido alguna amenaza o se ha sentido perseguida por iniciar un proceso de justicia. Es decir, esto ha tenido una vía libre frente a la justicia norteamericana, a pesar de los obstáculos, a pesar incluso del desdén que usted narraba por parte de las autoridades, pero si, no obstante, además de eso, pudiera haber algún indicio de persecución, de amenaza, de pretensión de que usted se detuviera en esta consecución de justicia. Esa es mi pregunta. Muchas gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Caballero. Commissioner Ralón.
Muchas gracias, presidenta. Igualmente quisiera mostrar mis condolencias, solidaridad a doña Lesley por la irreparable pérdida de su hijo, y sin duda alguna es algo que impactó en su proyecto de vida, en una situación tan difícil. Mi pregunta sería relacionada a cómo cree que ante esta lamentable situación el Estado pueda de alguna manera hacer los esfuerzos de reparar los daños que ha causado esta lamentable situación. Esa sería mi pregunta. Muchas gracias.
Commissioner Bulkan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. McSpadden, I join my colleagues in offering you my sincere sympathies. It's totally inadequate. It's against the order of nature for a parent to bury a child. And you have my total sympathies, and I congratulate you in pursuing justice, and I hope that you do get some measure of justice at some stage. I wanted to ask you one question. At the outset of your testimony, you said that after Michael was killed, the streets were filled with people, and I think you said there were many others who had experienced the same thing. I'm not sure if that's what you said, but if indeed it was, and I see you shaking your head, can you give us a sense, after Michael was killed, what you learned about the experiences of other African Americans survivors, other parents like yourselves or family members who experienced the same kind of tragedy, under similar circumstances of police violence. I yield the floor back to you, Madam Chair.
I'm thinking maybe I should let Mrs. McSpadden answer those questions, and then Commissioner Pochak and myself, we will have the final round. Mrs. McSpadden, I don't envy you. You have a lot of questions to answer, but I think that they're off one, there's a theme to the question. So please do tell us what you think you need to tell us now.
So the people that were out in the streets that were giving me an earful about what the prosecutor was not going to do in their time with them, they were too victims of their children being killed, whether it was by the police or just a senseless shooting. But what they were saying to me is that they have been down this road with McCullough. And McCullough was our prosecutor for over 20 years, 24 years, I want to say. And that is a long time to not give justice to those who deserve it. And his bias and his anger came from his father being killed by a Black man in a predominantly Black community. And he held that and used it in every way that he could as the prosecutor against our communities, especially when it was a police shooting. So there are several cases that should be in the books about shootings in St. Louis County and Bob McCullough being a prosecutor where he did not prosecute in the right way. He mishandled a lot of those cases. And there has been other senators and other Congress to speak up and out against him during his time in office. And that's what I was referring to. For the second question about me and my family and what we endured, the PTSD is overwhelming. I do have 3 remaining children. I was very scared and nervous to let them out of my sight for weeks after Mike was killed. My youngest at the time was 6 years old. My children know that I am adamant about education, and so are they. So not until she came to my door one day, 2 weeks after Mike was killed, in her full uniform, and she told me that she wanted to go to school, I knew that I had to get up and I had to continue being their mother. And I went to the school and I talked to the counselors and the teachers, and I got an understanding with them that they would, treat my kids with kid gloves and be gentle with them because they're going through a fragile state. From there, I met a therapist and we started therapy. We are still active in therapy to this day, 10 years later. And essentially, I had to walk away from my job. I worked in the heart of Clayton, which is the county of Missouri, predominantly white area. The people that I worked for were really, really good to me. They put a trust together for me because they knew that I would more than likely have to walk away from my job. Through that trust was a address. And through that address, I received tons and tons of threatening letters. It got so bad where my lawyers had to look through my mail before I looked through it. That's how bad it got. So yes, I was threatened. Yes, trying to get justice for my son. I have ran into many obstacles.
Thank you very much, Mrs. McSpadden. I now ask Commissioner Pochak to ask her questions.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta, y también me sumo a un abrazo fraternal, Lesley, y una felicitación por convertir tu dolor inmenso en esta lucha tan importante para tu hijo y para todas las personas que sufren la misma violencia y discriminación. Quiero preguntarte sobre Michael. Es quien está atrás tuyo, ¿verdad? En la foto. Me gustaría que nos cuentes quién era. Dijiste que era un buen hijo, un buen hermano. Quisiera que aproveches estos minutos para contarnos cuántos años tenía, qué hacía, cómo era él. Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Great. So Michael was my firstborn. I was a teenage mother. So we grew up together. Michael, at 8 years old, Michael was diagnosed with ADHD, which came with an IEP, and he was a part of a special school district. Outside of that, Michael was brilliant. What he lacked in, he soared in other areas. He was really great with figuring things out on his own. He was great at computers. He would have been a part of this large tech world if Michael was still here. Michael graduated from Normandy High School at 18 years old, and that was a proud moment for us. He was a part of the PAL learning program, but he was an outstanding student. He never had any problems at school. He even wrote a Martin Luther King speech before, not a speech about Martin Luther King, I'm sorry, but Mike was the leader in our house. He was the first of everything. My first son, a first grandson, and a great big brother. My children miss him terribly. They sit around and reminisce about Mike all the time. He never had a job. He never learned how to drive. He was just beginning his life. So that was his first, free summer to be a kid before he branched over into being a man. But he was robbed of that on August 9th.
Thank you very much, Mrs. McSpadden. He was robbed of it, and so were you and your entire family. I want to ask you, Mrs. McSpadden, you said when you heard the first decision not to indict the police officer who killed your son, you were crushed, you were hurt, you were frustrated. You said you lost hope, and then you said something else. You said, that was not the first strike for me. I want you to tell us, what did you mean? What did you mean by that? And what has been your experience with the justice system?
Well, I actually said that was the first strike for me. We had 3 occasions. The first one was, of course, local. The second one was with the DOJ. And when Lesley was elected into office, that was the third one for me.
Okay,
so I felt like I pretty much had struck out. Yes, ma'am. Yes, I'm sorry if you misunderstood.
No, thank you for the clarity. And then you, of course, consider that the failure to charge the police officer who killed your son was a denial of justice. And I know that you've been thinking about this a lot and looking at the records and getting all the information that you can. Can you point us in any direction where you think that there were clear failures of investigation?
Of course, from the moment my son on Canfield, when we arrived on Canfield, I hadn't spoke to anyone. I wasn't even aware that my son was unalived. I just knew that my son had been shot and that he was hurt. The first officer that I saw on Canfield, I asked him a direct question, and that question was, "Is that my son?" And he responded to me with yes. But how did he know? How did he even know who I was? I had never spoken to these people before, seen these people before. Mike had never been in trouble. So that was my first sign of confusion, because no one called me directly. Within 24 hours, I received a phone call from a detective, and his last name happened to be Wilson, first name Matt. And he said to me that Darren Wilson will return to work right away after he gets a psychological testing. It probably hadn't even been 24 hours. And this is the call that I was receiving. So I absolutely knew that something wasn't right. Something wasn't right, because I didn't even know who had shot my son. I had never laid eyes on this person. A name was not revealed to me, but I was being told that this person would be returning to work with his tool belt, with his gun, after psychological testing.
Thank you very much, Mrs. McSpadden. And now the presentation of the arguments of the parties will begin. The petitioners will have 15 minutes to present their arguments. Then the state will have 15 minutes to present its arguments. Subsequently, if the petitioner so wishes, they will have 5 minutes to exercise their right to reply to the state. And the state will also have 5 minutes should they wish to exercise their right to rejoinder. And then the commissioners will ask questions of both the petitioner as well as of the state. So with that, I give the floor to the petitioners so they can make their presentations, and please be mindful of the clock. You have 15 minutes. Mr. McMullen, is it you?
Ms. Kennedy, are you able to, is your,
I think she's on mute.
So sorry.
there we go.
There you have it.
Just 1 second. Here we go, sorry. Good afternoon, commissioners, staff of the commission, and state representatives. I'm Carrie Kennedy, president of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. I will be followed by Justin Hansford of the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center at Howard University School of Law, and Delia Adu-Yobo from RFK Human Rights. But before proceeding, I want to address Lesley. Lesley, you exemplify what it means to speak truth to power. To all of us participating in this hearing and watching online, I ask that we all keep your words in our hearts as we proceed today and the days to come. Lesley, you said of one of the investigation reports, it has a lot of holes in it, just like Mike's body. That's the heart of this question. Why did Mike's body have all those holes in it? And why did the investigations, one after the other, have so many holes in them? I thank you for your strength and for your courage. Next month marks the 10-year anniversary of Michael Brown's murder. It also marks the 10-year anniversary in his family's search for justice. And sadly, 10 years of impunity. 10 years. But please, falling on the deaf ears of the US government, 10 years of the US government pushing back at all levels against the family's quest for accountability. On August 9, 2014, Officer Darren Wilson executed Michael Brown. Witnesses who saw the shooting say Mike's hands were raised in surrender as he begged the officer not to kill him. The undisputed record shows that Officer Wilson, acting in his own official, not in his own capacity, in his official capacity on behalf of the Ferguson Police Department, a department plagued by racist and excessive use of force against Black people, threw protocols out the window when he initiated an aggressive, violent, and expletive-laden encounter with Mike. Officer Wilson, a white police officer acting in furtherance of a department engaged in systemic racist policing at the time, never once attempts de-escalation. Instead, he describes this young Black teenager as a demon and a Hulk-like figure. Never once did Officer Wilson reach for his mace, his flashlight, his baton, or any other non-lethal instrument. Instead, he drew his gun, shot Mike, chased him down, and emptied nearly all his bullets into the body of an unarmed teenager. Officer Wilson never once tried to resuscitate Mike. He did not call an ambulance. Neither did any of the other officers who arrived in the scene within minutes. Not one Ferguson police officer attempted to aid Mike. Instead, the police left Mike's lifeless body uncovered in the blistering summer heat for over 4 hours. He was left there in plain view for the entire community to see, for his family and his loved ones to see. From the community's perspective, there was only one way to interpret this: a warning, a brazen demonstration of power and control by a police force that even the DOJ admits was engaged in racist violations of human rights. Today, instead of joining the family in their quest for accountability, the United States seeks to deny it. We will undoubtedly hear from the state a litany of all the things they have done to address the scourge of racist police violence in this country over the last 10 years, some of which I commend them for doing. But we must ask ourselves, is it enough? Is it enough when in the years following Mike Brown's assassination, police killed Rakia Boyd, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Manuel Paez-Terran, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd? The answer is no. Is it enough when Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed by police in this country? The answer is no. Is it enough when more people were killed by police in 2023 than any other previously recorded year? The answer is no. Is it enough when the person who killed Mike Brown has never faced any form of accountability? The answer is resoundingly no. And that is why we are here, to ask the Commission to hold the United States government accountable, not to its own claims of progress here and there, not to the standards of its own internal laws, which are clearly insufficient, but to its binding obligations under international human rights law. And those obligations demand nothing less than true accountability and repair. Thank you.
The state failed Ms. Lesley McSpadden time and time again. Each failure more gut-wrenching than the last. First, the Ferguson police internally failed to hold Darren Wilson accountable. He acted as judge, jury, and executioner. Rather than reprimand him for his violent actions that day, Wilson's superiors placed him on paid administrative leave. He remains free to seek employment at any law enforcement agency in the United States to this day. Second, former St. Louis prosecuting attorney Bob McCullough notoriously conducted a grand jury rife with bias and error. Legal scholars across the country overwhelmingly condemned McCullough's rigged grand jury process. In grand juries, prosecutors only present evidence that supports a finding of probable cause that a crime happened. Here, McCullough departed from ordinary protocol and announced that he would share all available evidence with the grand jury, including evidence seeking to protect Darren Wilson. McCullough then allowed Wilson to defend himself in front of the grand jury, failed to cross-examine Wilson on his contradictory statements, knowingly presented perjured testimony, likely used an unconstitutional jury instruction, implying that it would be harder to indict Wilson than it actually was, contradicted the physical record, presented irrelevant evidence intended to paint the victim, Mike Brown, in a negative light, then ignored evidence of Officer Wilson's past abuses of power, his racial bias, and his steroid use, a chemical which makes people hyper-aggressive. McCullough's actions were and are reprehensible. He betrayed his responsibility to pursue justice. He purposely sought to absolve Darren Wilson of murder. And the St. Louis prosecutor who replaced McCullough was no better. Wesley Bell took McCullough's place in 2019, but he too failed both Lesley and Mike. He made empty promises to Lesley, then failed to act with due diligence, and never opened a new, unbiased investigation. In 2020, his office launched a 5-month review of the case, but he reviewed only some of the corrupted evidence that was compiled by his predecessor, Bob McCullough. By lazily basing his investigation on Bob McCullough's tainted notes, his outcome was no better than McCullough's. In the end, he abdicated his duty to hold Wilson accountable out of fear of political retribution. Bell's ambition now has led him to seek office as a U.S. congressman. His appetite to secure justice for Lesley and her family, unfortunately, was not as strong as his desire for self-advancement. So the government failed time and time again, but the blame does not just lie with local government. It belongs also to the federal government. They too failed to act with due diligence. The evidence simply did not support the DOJ's final conclusion. They often cite their 87-page report as if its length justifies its legitimacy, but that report itself is biased and contains internal contradictions and sloppy errors. Wilson testified that Mike put his right hand in his waistband like he was reaching for a gun. Of course, Mike didn't have a gun or anything in his waistband. Even more, if Mike did reach for his waistband with his right hand, there should have been blood on his pants, since Wilson had already shot Brown's right thumb, but there was no blood found on his pants. The DOJ report ignores this. Instead, the report states that, quote, Wilson's version of events is corroborated by the fact that Brown went to the ground with his left hand, although not inside his waistband, unquote. Instead of using his obvious contradiction of Mike's left hand versus right hand to impeach Wilson's testimony, the DOJ used it to corroborate Wilson's testimony. That's what we mean by calling the investigation sloppy. The position of Mike's left hand is the first and strongest reason the DOJ gives for being unable to prosecute Wilson. They use this fact to discredit multiple witnesses disfavorable to the police and Wilson's narrative. But writing a report mistaking the right hand for the left does more to discredit the DOJ report than it does the witnesses who say that Mike Brown was surrendering when Darren Wilson brutally shot him to death. After DOJ announced their decision not to prosecute Darren Wilson, former Attorney General Eric Holder noted himself that the federal civil rights law that was used to investigate Darren Wilson was requiring a standard of proof that was quote unquote too high. This is a standard under Section 242 that historically has failed to even find Ku Klux Klan members liable for lynchings of their victims because the standard was too high. And much like the KKK members in the past, racist police officers in the present are walking free, and today we're asking for justice.
In light of all these facts, we ask the Commission to help Lesley and her family gain some measure of justice. The Commission has noted in its own 2019 report that impunity in case of police killings has a deep impact on the families and victims and ultimately works to undermine the rule of law. In the last decade, the police have only gotten worse, despite what the government is about to tell you. We call for a special prosecutor to conduct a non-biased investigation. But we know the prosecution, even the jailing of Darren Wilson, is not enough to bring healing to the Brown family. Because even when police officers do face criminal charges, they are often acquitted. And if they are convicted, they receive much lighter sentences, usually a slap on the wrist compared to civilians who are convicted of similar crimes. If there's a civil suit, officers are protected by qualified immunity, and even when families do win in these civil suits, it is the taxpayer who pays, not the officer. Police who kill in the United States move with outright impunity, and Darren Wilson is case in point. At no point in the last 10 years has he ever faced any form of accountability. To combat this, victims need reparations. In this case, reparations is a public apology from the state of Missouri and federal government to the family of Mike Brown. It is the creation of a Mike Brown Fund using existing police budgets on the local, state, and federal level. Reparations is the Helping Families Heal Act, which provides funds for families to receive mental health support when victimized by police violence. Reparations is the amendment of civil rights laws to prevent and account for police brutality and to align use of force standards with international law. These requests go beyond punishment. These remedies are intended to create a meaningful sense of repair. Lesley and her family are long overdue for reparations. We hope that today's process can be part of the family's healing process. They deserve justice. Mike Brown deserves justice. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Petitioners, are you complete your presentation? Yes, okay. I now give the floor to the state delegation so that they can make their own oral presentation. Representatives of the state, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark. Thank you to all the commissioners who are taking part today, as well as the petitioners. Most especially, thank you to Mrs. McSpadden for being here and sharing your experience. My name is Thomas Hastings. I have the honor of representing the U.S. mission to the Organization of American States and the U.S. State Department in my role as Deputy Chief of Mission. To begin briefly, as most of you are aware, the United States strongly supports the work of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and we've been one of its strongest defenders in support of its work to protect and uphold human rights across the Americas. And when I say across the Americas, I mean not just in Latin America and the Caribbean. We must welcome the role of the Commission to shine a light on our own failings as well as a government, even when those are very painful episodes in our recent history. We come together today to discuss one of those painful episodes, which is the shooting of Mike Brown nearly 10 years ago. We are deeply saddened by this event and by similar events across our nation. And this event serves as another reminder that we must do more to prevent such tragedies. While we do not intend to discuss or debate the details of what took place on August 9th, 2014, it was a devastating event that led to the loss of life of a young man. Ms. McSpadden, you have our sympathies, and we thank you again for being here today. As you will hear in a moment from my colleague from the Department of Justice, the U.S. government is working to deliver on police reform and criminal justice reform. And since the events that we are discussing here took place, the U.S. government has made significant changes in federal law enforcement policies. A central objective of my office, the U.S. mission of the Organization of American States, is to foster engagement not just between the Department of State, but also between other U.S. government agencies and the inter-American human rights system. And as such, in recent years, we've facilitated the participation of representatives from across our government in hearings such as this one. As we previously informed the Commission, we will likely not be able to answer all questions asked today, but we will take back any we cannot answer for further consideration and responses. Today, we welcome Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Assistant Attorney General Clark joined the department in 2021 after serving as the President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under the law. And she has previously held positions in the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund and was Director of the New York State Attorney General's Civil Rights Bureau. So I now turn over the floor to Assistant Attorney General Clark.
Thank you.